I was with a cab driver the other day, and we were driving around in the city, and he said, it's hard for me even to get around in the city. And he said, the businessmen now tell me I used to be able to do 5 meetings a day. Now I can do 2 meetings a day because of the traffic. And I said, well, where's the traffic? Everyone's working from home. And he said, look, I've got this barrier here, this pedestrian barrier that's supposed to give people more room to work on the sidewalk, but there's nobody on the sidewalk. I can't go down this road. And I was like, why? I thought black cabs can go anywhere. He said, no, I'm not allowed to drive here, 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 and here. Road closures. What is the state of transport here in London, and how does that affect the cabbie?
Right. Well, let's. The state of transport in London is dire. What's happened? Make no mistake. The COVID, the coronavirus crisis, has led to opportunistic land grabbing by certain people in certain positions. What has happened over recent years in London? If you go back, and it's pretty much across the country. If you go back 20 years. The people who worked in town halls, the local authority, they were people who had started at the town hall, and very few of them would have had degrees or various university qualifications. They would have perhaps had an A level, a sort of. They would have finished American. They would have finished high school. They're them sort of qualifications, and they progressed through the town hall over the years. They were predominantly local people. The people who were elected to run the town halls were local people who wanted to, get involved and help, and they made the decisions, and the local people implemented them. In recent years, what has happened is it's transformed. It's become an industry. So the people running the town halls, the chief executives and people, are now all on £200,000 a year salaries. I mean, it's quite incredible. $250,000 a year to run a small borough in London. And they've got a plethora of executives, on 50, 80 and £100,000 a year. And they now see it as a mission to run London in their image. Many of them all of them will be graduates. They will all live quite centrally. They'll all be middle class, and they've got very middle class values and middle class ideals. So what would happen is, as an example, they live in the very centre of town. This is in central London, and they work very centrally. And what's happened is the local cycling groups, again, predominantly white people, predominantly educated people, they've got themselves in positions of power, elected into these local councils. And when COVID came along, they saw it as an absolute opportunity to impose their will on the rest of London. And their will is closed roads, cycle lanes, restricting motor traffic. Motor traffic's bad. If they had their way, they would be able to sit in the middle of Oxford Circus or Piccadilly Circus, drinking a coconut caramel eco latte, without any thought as to how the bits that are, constituent parts get there. They don't care. They're all about themselves. They're just selfish.
But isn't it their job to stimulate the economy? And can't they see that these policies hurt London from moving around?
They don't hurt them.
Okay.
That's the crux. What they hurt is the working class people who have to deliver the goods, the builders, the plumbers, the tradespeople, and the people, the ordinary people who come to work on the bus. Who live slightly out in the suburbs, or they live a bit further out. They can't walk or cycle to work. They have to get the bus. The buses are stuck in the traffic like everything else. I mean, I saw a recent survey last week that even though London is virtually deserted, as you're aware, bus times are up 40%. Bus delays are up 40%. Traffic's down, bus delays are up. Why is that? Because they're closing all the roads. But it's good for them. They're imposing their will on the greatest city on the planet. And London is, wherever you're from, it's one of the greatest cities on the planet.
It is the greatest city.
Yeah, personally, I like San Francisco, but it's the great, I'll put it number 2. But it's the greatest city certainly the big mega city on the planet. And these people are building it in their own image and they're destroying it. And I'm watching it happen before my very eyes. And they've got no shame. And these local traffic neighbourhoods that they've put in, the local people, working class people, are now beginning to have demonstrations. There was a big one in Bethnal Green last week. There's one every Saturday in Islington. There's been one in Brixton. And the one in Brixton was quite incredible. Brixton's a borough just south of the river in London. There was a large number, cross-section of Brixtonians, black people, Asian people, white people, all ages, demonstrating that these road closures are killing their businesses. They're making it harder for them to get to work, harder for them to move out. And the local elected councillor is mocking them on Twitter. I mean, it was quite incredible. These people have just... It's not people. These demonstrators are saying that it's not democratic because they wasn't asked. No one was asked. There's been no consultations. No one has been asked. These things have been enforced upon us under emergency legislation, and these councillors are now saying, "Look, you elected me to make decisions, and this is the decision I made." They're just abusing their power. It's a land grab. It's wrong for London. It's wrong for business. It's a disaster.
Yeah, and it's frustrating to hear because I don't hear it except for cabbies or you see these demonstrations, but it's not really talked about in mainstream. The government's not telling you what they're taking away, and yet they're making these executive decisions. You know, Boris makes these calls and Sadiq makes these calls without having to be accountable or counsel people for this, and then it has these big ramifications, including slowing down business, which, on top of all the other things you're saying about screwing these communities up, that's what boggles my mind, that they wouldn't say, we're desperate to get this economy back. We got to get this city at least moving around because it's a city of commerce, right? And yet people are stuck. I know, you're frustrated.
No, we've got a Tory government destroying business. I mean, forget your politics, but that's the one thing that no one ever accused the Tories of. The Tories were always seen, the Conservatives were always seen as the party of business. And yet it's a Tory government that without even getting into the mistakes they've made over this corona and COVID epidemic, forget those mistakes, but just the emergency powers and legislation they've brought in to stop business, to gridlock London unnecessarily, to stop people from working. I mean, what they're actually doing as well, in some of the suburbs, they've rephased the traffic lights to stop people getting in, to actually artificially create traffic jams to discourage people from coming in. Well, what that means is they're discouraging people from going to work, and people who have to go to work have now got to sit there and take longer. So just think about that for a second. Your elected representatives are actually trying to stop you from going to work. I mean, you couldn't make this stuff up, but it's happening. And the big problem is in central London at the moment, with central London politics, and is that the cabinet in number 10 is being, the cabinet are not actually running government. There's a few senior advisors to Boris buried deep into number 10 who are making these decisions and making policy. And often the first that ministers are aware of it is when they're told what's happening. Now, I've spoken to several government ministers recently, and I won't name them out of respect for their confidentiality, but they're very frustrated at what's going on. They're very frustrated at the road closures. The government's transport policy seems to be to impose the will of cycling on everybody. Now, if you think about it, we're designing a city for cyclists, which is great, but London's not the warmest place on the planet, and when the sun doesn't shine, the number of cyclists drops massively. And when they do all these cycling counts, they do it on a warm afternoon in June. They don't do it at 10 o'clock at night in November or 3 o'clock in the afternoon in November when there's no one in these cycle lanes. Cycling is a commuter occupation for very wealthy inner London commuters. For the rest of us, it's a nightmare.